This meeting is being recorded.
Wow. Okay. So again, I'm Anna Brown from Katie Budget Books. We are really excited about this panel this evening. For those of you who've been with us for romance panels in the past, you know that romance is my personal passion. So I love that we've been having these quarterly panels to help you guys build your TBR piles. We are really excited to have with us tonight Timothy Janovsky, Heather McCollum, T. O'Fallon, and Lacie Waldon. They have all written really stellar previous and upcoming books, and I have read all their most recent releases and love them so much. So I'm going to do a brief bio of each author, let them tell you about their most recent release, and then we're just going to have a conversation. So I need to, how do I, sorry, weird tech thing. Okay. So first, Timothy Janovsky is a queer multidisciplinary storyteller from New Jersey. He holds a degree in theater and dance from Muhlenberg College. His work as a humor writer has been featured on Points in Case, The Broadway Beat, and Well Mannered Grump, and his fiction short story debut was published by Voyage YA Journal. When he's not daydreaming about a young Hugh Grant, he's writing the queer rom-coms he wished he had as a teenager. Never Been Kissed is his first novel. I adored it so much. I love the Dimmy rep in particular. So Timothy, can you tell us a little bit about Never Been Kissed?
Sure, yeah. So Never Been Kissed is my debut novel. It is a new adult rom-com pitched as To All the Boys I've Loved Before, set at a drive-in movie theater. It tells the story of Ren Roland, who has never been kissed, never been in love, but he wants his movie perfect ending more than anything. And so on the night of his 22nd birthday, he gets very drunk and very nostalgic, and he ends up drunk sending a bunch of emails to all the boys he crushed on before he came out of the closet. And what he learns through that interaction is that his number one pre-coming out crush, Derek Haverford, is going to be working with him at their vintage drive-in movie theater. And so their epic summer together may just end in a perfect kiss before the credits.
It is so fun. I loved it so much. And it has everything you want from the rom-com, right? Like it feels like a classic rom-com movie, which I adored. Thank you so much, Timothy.
Thanks.
Next is Heather McCollum. She is a USA Today bestselling, award-winning historical romance writer. She earned her BA in biology and was a 2009 Golden Heart Finalist. When she is not creating vibrant characters and magical adventures on the page, she is roaring her own battle cry in the war against ovarian cancer. Ms. McCollum recently slayed the cancer beast and resides with her very own hero and 3 kids in the wilds of suburbia on the mid-Atlantic coast, and has also recently been to Scotland, which I hope we're going to get to talk about a little bit tonight. Her most recent title is Highland Justice, the 3rd book in the Sons of Sinclair series. I read it as a standalone. I'm going to go back and read the other 2 now, but you can read it that way. I love the hero absolutely didn't want to fall in love, and the heroine also was not interested in it. I always love that beginning where it's like, no, we don't need anybody. So Heather, tell us a little bit about it.
Sure. Well, so the books are, it is the 3rd book in the series, but they can be read as standalone. So I just wanted to mention sort of what the series is about for those, who might be interested in that. These Sons of Sinclair, they're 4 brothers, and they were raised by a warlord, war-loving chief who sort of went mad when his wife died giving birth to the 4th son. And so he decided that it was the end of days with his Alice gone, and that he was going to raise his 4 boys as the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. So the first one is conquest, the second one is war, the 3rd one is justice, and the 4th one is death. And so each brother, each son needs to learn about who he really is. For instance, in the first book, Highland Conquest, love is all about giving. Conquest is all about taking. And so in order for the hero to win the greatest prize of all, which is love, he has to totally change how he was, his whole life paradigm has to change in order for that to happen. And the same goes with each book. The person who, the son who was raised as the horseman of war, suddenly doesn't want to war so much, and the reader finds out why, even when the heroine is asking him to war on her behalf. And in the 3rd one, justice, everything for Gideon has been black or white. There's no gray. It's either good or bad, right or wrong. And so he's totally turned upside down by this woman who ends up breaking all his laws. And he has to figure out what he's going to do about that.
Thank you, Heather. I really enjoyed it. And next we have Tio Fallon, who's the author of the Canine Special Ops, Federal Canine, and NYPD Blue and Gold series. She spent 23 years as a federal agent conducting complex, long and short-term criminal investigations, especially undercover operations across many agencies at the federal level, and multi-state investigations as a police investigator. It felt only natural to combine her hands-on experience in the field with her love of romantic suspense. She has lived in New York State most of her life with a 5-year stop in Colorado. When not writing, she enjoys cooking, gardening, chocolate, martinis, and kicking back with her Belgian sheepdogs, Loki and Kyrie. She's here tonight for Tough Justice, the first book in a new series with like the sexiest hero ever and also the best doggo in the world. So T, can you tell us a little bit about it?
Sure. Thanks, Katie. And I'm so glad you enjoyed the book. So Tough Justice is the first in my brand new Canine Special Ops series. And this is actually a spinoff of the Federal Canine series, of which Lock and Load is the first. So the Canine Special Ops series takes place in Denver. And the reason for that is, as you said, I lived most of my life in New York and 17 years in New Jersey. Go Timothy. So my publisher said, you know, T, we need to write a series in another state just to break things up a little bit. So since I did a 5-year stop in Colorado, that's where this series wound up. So Tough Justice is the first of this series and follows DEA Special Agent Adam Decker, who's nicknamed Deck, and his canine companion Thor, the biggest, most lovable Belgian Malinois with some very interesting characteristics. No spoilers here, you got to read the book. At any rate, Deck has very personal reasons for not trusting doctors. Something happened in his family's past. Again, no spoilers. However, he is faced with a deadly opioid crisis that is sweeping the streets of Denver. And as many of us have probably heard in the news, it's really a nationwide problem. So that issue is very much on the forefront of the news today and has been in recent past. He confronts Tori, who is an ER doctor, and Tori has her own personal reasons for not trusting the DEA. Like Deck, something happened in her family's past, and she has some very valid reasons for being cautious around Deck. And yet they both want the same things. Deck wants to get this deadly opioid dealer off the streets of Denver, and Tori is sick and tired of seeing opioid overdoses roll into her ER and then roll out, beelining downstairs for the morgue. So despite their issues with each other, they have a common goal. They want to stop this opioid crisis, and they find that by working together, they're starting to make some headway towards finding who this source is. And of course, along the way, they get to know each other. They come to first respect each other. Tori falls in love with Thor. Naturally, Thor falls in love with Tori. And eventually, since this is a romance in the end, the two of them do find their happily ever after, but not without having to scale some seriously high emotional walls. And they each find they have internal issues that need to be overcome as well. So it's definitely an uphill battle.
Yeah, I loved it so much. I love the dogs. I'm a sucker for dogs, but it's also the perfect blend of that suspense storyline and the romance storyline. It's so phenomenal.
Thank you.
And last but not least is Lacie Waldon. She's a writer with her head in the clouds, literally. A flight attendant based in Washington, D.C., Waldon spends her days writing from the jump seat and searching the world for new stories. She's the author of The Layover, which is currently out in the world, and her upcoming From the Jump, coming out July 19th. I read From the Jump as an early copy. It's one of the perks of my job in preparation for this event. And you guys, I literally could not put it down. It's one of those books that I started reading, like, I'm going to read a little bit before bed and then I'll finish it another day. And then I just stayed up way too late because I loved it so much. It's such a fun summer read. I can't wait for you guys to be able to get your hands on it. Lacie, you want to tell us a little bit about your books?
Well, that's so fun to hear. I'm so glad you enjoyed it. Thanks for reading it. Okay, so my books, my first one was The Layover, and I have a copy of that one. But I don't have From the Jump yet because it's not out. I just got news that my author copies are being mailed out soon. So I'm super excited to see it in person. The Layover is about a flight attendant who kind of grew up in a wanderlusty, for lack of a better word, can I make words up as an author? A wanderlusty household, and she has always aspired to like put down roots and have this settled existence. But somehow she found herself being a flight attendant, which is the opposite of that. So when the book starts, she's just gotten engaged, and her husband also, or her fiance also, has no interest in being married to someone who's gone all the time. So it's just kind of understood that she's got to quit her job now, and this is going to be her last trip ever. And she scores her way into this trip that includes like a 24-hour layover in Belize. And she's super excited for that to be kind of her last hurrah. But then she ends up on the trip with a super weird crew. And worst of all, her nemesis, Jack Stone. So as the trip goes on, she finds herself like questioning the way that she has perceived all these people, and more importantly, kind of how she wants her life to look. So that's The Layover. And then From the Jump is about a woman who has spent her whole life doing what she's supposed to do and saying yes to everything that everybody else tells her to do and wants from her. And all of a sudden she just decides she's going to start saying no. So it's what happens when she takes her life on her own. And it doesn't go great for her, but it also doesn't go terribly. So that's it.
It was really so much fun. And it's not all fun. There's some bad stuff that happens for her. But okay. All right. Thank you all so much for being here with us tonight. So the first thing we always want to talk about at our romance panels is just kind of heat levels, because different romance readers have kind of different preferences and heat levels. How spicy are y'all's books? Just so that the audience has kind of an idea of what they're looking at here. Heather, you want to go first?
Sure. So I tell people, if you're looking at a scale from 1 to 10, with 1 being sort of like Amish Christian books and 10 being erotica, I probably write around a 7, maybe 7.5, somewhere around there.
Okay. T?
So I was going to do a 1 to 5 scale. And Katie, jump in if you disagree. I would say maybe a 4. I mean, right there's nothing weird or kinky about the love scenes in the book, but I try to make them really, shall we say, hot. Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, or hot. So I would say at least a 4.
Lacie?
I have been informed numerous times that my books are not spicy enough. From the Jump was a little more so. There was a moment. I'd say on a scale of 1 to 10, The Layover was like a 2.6. And From the Jump, I don't know, what do you think? Like a 4.8?
Yeah. Timothy?
So if we're using the 1 to 10 scale, Never Been Kissed doesn't have any spice, mostly just sweet, sugar spun cotton candy. And then I have another book coming out in October called You're a Mean One, Matthew Prince. And that one exists closer to the middle of this scale. There is some steam and spice in that book. So I usually decide steam based on character. So what the characters want out of the romance is what they get.
Okay, I'm not
I
kind of
think
like
Timothy and I wrote our first ones for our mothers.
It's fair.
I did not, and I told my mother she couldn't read those portions.
Tap them down.
My mother kept saying, but my whole Bible study is planning to buy it.
Well, Mom, maybe.
That's good.
All right, and Timothy, you said you kind of start with your characters and they tell you, and that kind of leads into my next question, which is like, where do your stories start from? Does a character start speaking to you and you have to tell their story, or do you start with like something just brought something to mind in the plot that you start kind of building from? So Timothy, why don't you go ahead and start on this one?
Sure. Yeah. So since I have a background in theater, I usually come to writing from an acting perspective. So I write from the first person present tense, usually, not always. But a lot of times I will put myself in the shoes of the character, decide what it is that they want, and then kind of see like how many obstacles I can make them hurdle over to get to their happily ever after. And so for me, I'm definitely usually thinking character first, but specifically with Never Been Kissed, I had Ren in mind, but I knew I wanted to set a rom-com at a drive-in movie theater. And so the setting coupled with the character kind of brought about this kind of cinematic summer second chance. So yeah, it's a combination of the two. Usually, like specifically with the drive-in, during COVID times, I got to go to a lot of drive-ins to see movies because our regular movie theaters were closed, and in Pennsylvania, they're only open in the summertime. So that whole perfect storm kind of came together to create Never Been Kissed.
Lacie?
I was looking at my hair when you asked the question.
Your hair looks very nice.
Thanks, honey.
Where do your stories start from? Do you start with a character speaking to you and you can't get them to shut up, or do you start with the setting?
I always start with from the romance place and the interactions that they'll have. And then I kind of build the story around that. Like, are they going to be enemies? But I'm always thinking about banter and like the first kiss.
T?
I generally start out with an outline or a beat sheet that can be anywhere from 25 to 50 pages, depending on my mood. Although as my writing career progresses, I find they get shorter and shorter, and I start becoming less of a plotter and more of a pantser, flying by the seat of my pants. But I think because my books tend to be at least 50-50 romance, plot, crime story, maybe even 60% crime story, I'm not really sure. It's tough. I mean, definitely the character growth starts with the characters and what kinds of personalities I set them up with. So even though I have usually a fairly detailed outline, definitely once I'm writing, literally sitting there with my fingers on the keyboard, and the conversation flows, especially between the two main characters, their personalities come out and things just come to mind that maybe I hadn't thought of. And we were talking about how spicy our books are. There was a scene in a book that I have releasing in July. And I really like this scene because it's different. I've never done a love scene like this. My editor said, do something on the beach. So it started out on the beach and it wound up somewhere else. And their personalities played into it quite a bit. So I forget, what was the question?
Where do your stories start from? Got distracted by your own love scene there, did you?
So, yeah, my stories are just as much about the crime that has to be solved as they are about the characters and where the characters are going, how they're going to interact, and, the kinds of conversations they're going to have between each other.
Okay. And Heather?
I guess mine, I'm a right by the seat of your pants kind of gal. Although I do try really hard to plot things out, especially, they kind of want that for a contract. And so I start with character development. There's always an argument going on, like who who would be arguing about something? And I have these big alpha male, heroes and feisty heroines. So there's like, they're just set up to argue and fight. And so that's usually where it starts as a little argument in my head, and what would make it worse, and what would make them less likely to ever be together. And let's talk about that, and give them free reign. And then I'm a very visual writer, so then I make these collages. I like to put them together, just cut out pictures and stuff, because that helps me then to take the next step. And actually I do a lot of character development while I'm cutting out pictures. And that really helps me take their arguments to the next level.
Okay. Speaking of arguments, one of the things as a reader that I have like a love-hate relationship with in romance is that you guys are really awful to your main characters. Like they go through some really horrible things. And I always wonder, like as authors, is it hard for you to make things that difficult for your characters? Do you find yourself having to scale back because you really enjoy being horrible to them? Like, what is that like with all the conflict that goes into a really good romance that pulls on your heartstrings? And Lacie, do you want to start this thing? Oh, you're muted.
Sorry, I'm not, my bio said I lived in DC. We actually just moved to Los Angeles and we're in a temporary apartment, and it's the loudest place I've ever been. And it's fine. I love it. Not great for this. And also I'm so hot right now. This is my first podcast in this place. And I'm like, okay, I got to work on, because, it's like units on the wall and the air conditioning, and they're so loud. But you're welcome for that random information about my life. So what happens to the characters? I mean, honestly, a lot of times I get inspiration from things that have happened to me. So like you said, from the jump, awful things happened to her. And I was thinking, what is it that was so awful? And I think I know one of the things that you're thinking about. And I literally went to South Africa to do, it was supposed to be a conservation project, but it was dumb. And so I left and I started backpacking around to different countries. And right after I left that conservation project, I went to a store on my way to the airport to get like provisions, and somebody stole my credit card number. And I found myself in Zambia, I think, that was my only card, and I had access to no money. And thank goodness I was close to the end of my trip, but like I was staying at a hostel and they just kind of made me like the mascot, and everybody would just give me like bread and cheese. And that's kind of how I stayed alive for a few days, because I had no access to funds. So Liv's been through nothing that I haven't been through.
Oh my God. Well, that's horrible for you, but I'm glad it turned out okay in the long run.
The beauty of it is that it was on my way to the airport. So my passport was stamped in other countries for every purchase that was made. So I was reimbursed for all of it. So I didn't mind at all. Plus, I like to say I hosted like one of the biggest parties that the country ever had, because it was the craziest charges. It would be like $950 at a liquor store, $425 at McDonald's. And you're like, how did they spend $425? And then it'd be back to the liquor store and then right back to McDonald's. It was just kind of, those were the two charges over and over. So for like, it took my bank like 8 days or something to think, Lacie's never drank and scarfed Big Macs so heavily in her whole life. Maybe we should look into this. But yeah, I didn't mind in the end because they had a lot of fun and I got my money back.
Okay. T?
Well, I absolutely love to torture my characters, particularly my heroes. There's just something super sexy about a big, strong, physically big, strong guy who's gone through so much in his life that he's just tormented inside. And, in the end, only the heroine's going to be the one capable of helping to heal him from the inside out. So that's typically what happens with me. I try to invent different backstories for each of my heroes. And, as Heather can probably tell you, it becomes difficult when you've written so many books to come up with a different backstory for each of these that can be just as emotional and just as poignant. So I try to do that for each of my guys, and something's got to happen to him in the book where he really has to confront whatever this issue is that's happened to him, whether it's in the past, present, or something he's worried about in the future. So that's kind of a common theme in my books, and I guess readers dig it.
Heather?
Sorry, my dog Sophie, whenever I'm on a Zoom, she has to come and make an appearance. So she heard me, and so she's, yeah, sorry. Okay, I'll tell you, I am the type of person that when there's a conflict on the TV in something, I leave the room. Like I really have a hard time with that. My mother's the same way. I inherited it. So the number one thing that my editor hits me with almost every time is, you're not being mean enough to your characters. They have to suffer more. So that is actually, I'm sort of opposite of T, where it really is hard. I always have to go back and just turn the screw a little bit tighter because it's not quite enough, because I'm sort of like typing with my hand over and keep wanting to leave the room, that sort of thing. But I'll tell you, the book I'm writing now, which is the fourth book, The Fourth Horseman, he's the one who, his mother died giving birth to him. So he was raised by a father who told him that his mother was his first execution. And so I don't even have to tighten that screw. I mean, he is tortured hero sort of guy. That's just how he was raised. So this book has been a lot easier to write, but normally it is kind of hard for me to torture my characters.
Timothy?
I would say, since I'm writing very kind of more traditional rom-com, it's more like hijinksy, slapsticky type sticky situations that my characters get into. But in a certain way, I think my favorite part to write is kind of right after the dark moment, and that kind of third act breakup moment where the two characters have to go away to kind of sort some things out and be apart for a period of time, because I think that's emotional torture for the two of them. But at the same time, what's really nice about that is that you kind of get to like pull your character up by the straps of their overalls and like shake them and say, like, look at all this stuff you learned together. Like, how are you going to rejoin in the end? And so in a way, I guess I do enjoy torturing them, because there's like really heavy emotional labor that has to be done. And for some reason, that's just one of my favorite parts to write when I'm working on a book.
Okay, so with your pairings, right? So a few of you said that you start with your characters. Maybe all of you said you started with your characters. Do you start with one character and then figure out the person that's going to be their perfect, like there's going to be some conflict, but they're going to be able to make it work? Or does like the couple come to you at one time? I'm like really curious about this process. T, you want to start this one?
Sure. I guess with my stories, given that they are so plot driven, I can't honestly recall which is more the driving force in figuring out who the characters are going to be. Is it the plot or is it the characters? I guess it usually starts with the hero. My books are pretty much aimed at women, but I know I have some diverse readers. But I generally start with the male character, and it starts with the agency that he works from. I try to do heroes who work for different agencies. So right off the bat, that dictates, is this going to be a drug case? Is this going to be an arson case? Is this going to be a missing persons case? Is this going to be a mafia case? So that's how it starts, is what's the character's backstory? What is their employment? Then I probably work with the hero first, and from there I decide what is going to be the backstory and the employment of the heroine. I mean, it's pretty factual for me when I start out. It really is like an outline. And I try and come up with, as Heather was saying, you got to fit together two people who are going to constantly have conflict until they decide, hey, we're falling in love with each other. So I've got to come up with a heroine now who's like an opposite and yet a complement to the hero. And whatever each of them does and whoever each of them are as individuals, there has to be a conflict and there has to be a path to them finding some common ground, both as professionals and as people and as a couple. So it starts out very technical, and then it kind of, as I hone it down, it becomes more personal and based on their personalities. I hope that made sense.
Yeah. Lacie? You're muted again. Sorry.
I didn't know what the question was. I was totally listening, but now I kind of forgot.
With your pairings, with your couples, do you start with one character and then kind of figure out what their complement is going to be, or does the couple like kind of come to you at the same time?
No, it's usually at the same time. Like if I have an idea for one of them, I'm immediately thinking about how the other one will like be a counterpart to build out the first one more. Like they kind of get built out together to see how they'll play off of each other. And I mean, I might have like I mean, it's not like I never have like a general idea of the story. So I might tailor them toward that, but they're generally tailored to how they'll play off each other. Because like I said, my dialogues, the dialogue is my favorite part. So I'm always working toward that.
Heather?
So I guess, I've been thinking about listening to everybody. I guess what I do is I hear an argument first or something, like say there's a battle and she ends up being, in battle as well. And he's like dumbstruck by that because this is the 16th century and women don't do that, right? So then what I do is I sort of take a step away and I go to my history because I love history. I better, if I write historical, I probably know more about the 16th century Britain than about US history. But so then I investigate time periods. There's so much drama in history, so much. So I'll go in and I'll find different battles in the 16th century. And then it's usually the hero. I guess my books are more about the hero. They're the ones who have the largest character arc. I mean, they both have to have character arcs, but he's the one usually that has to grow more. And so it's his book. And so I find a place in history where I can set him, and then how could I fit then the heroine to him more as an opposing factor? That makes sense.
And Timothy?
Yeah, I would say, like Lacie, I live for the banter. I love writing the dialogue. And so for me, and because I come character first, and I kind of started my writing journey writing YA romance, I usually know my point of view character the best. So for instance, in Never Been Kissed, Ren is a film nerd who is obsessed with retro. He has a collection of VHS tapes. He likes to listen to vinyl. Like, he is an old soul, and his friends, nickname him the grandpa of the group. And so when I was building out Derek, who is coming into the drive-in to overtake the social media and bring the drive-in into our time, that's a direct kind of attack on Ren's way of life. And so they get some really great butting head moments and banter there. So I think a lot of times I'm thinking about who that first POV character is, and then thinking about who's going to come in and really like shake up the snow globe for that person. And so then I usually build them out from there.
As a certified middle-aged person, it absolutely kills me to hear VHS referred to as retro, just like.
I mean, I love a VHS tape still. And when I was doing research, the very hard research for this book of going to different drive-in movie theaters, I went to a vintage only drive-in movie theater where they still show movies on film reels. So most drive-in movie theaters are digital now, but they do it on film reels. And they have a vintage shop that is just wall-to-wall VHS tapes and vinyl records. And it's like, I mean, it's very, very cool, and it's very, very heartwarming. But I know I have cousins who are like, what's a VHS tape? What's a CD player? So to some it is vintage. So.
Okay, well, you said research, and Heather kind of alluded to it. So this is probably the part in the conversation where we talk about that. I know there's a lot of like romance being referred to as fluff reads and like kind of derogatory stuff about that. But you guys really do have to do the work of like researching, and they're beautiful books and I love them, and I hate when people are insulting towards them at all. But there is some real research that goes into that. So why don't we talk about that a little bit? And Heather, do you want to start by telling us a little about your research trip to Scotland? Just because I also want to hear about Scotland.
Oh, yes, sure. I'm a very visual writer, and I use all my senses, of course. And so when COVID hit, I was supposed to be going to Scotland, and that got canceled. And so it was 2 long years, and I finally got to go back. I just got back a week ago. I had gone to the rare Edinburgh book signing, and then we went up north of there to some castles. And I mean, I got to just sit out on the moors, and breathe in the air and touch all the stones in the castle. I mean, there's pictures of me just laying on the castle. I'm like, and even got a really cool picture of a ghost behind me. I'll have to, really, it was pretty cool in a haunted castle. So yes, that was a very fun research trip. I do gather all the guidebooks that I can find. I talk to people. We met someone who raises the Highland coos, the cows, and got to talk to him about how he does that, and just finding out about how things are done there and the history that they know of, how they pronounce things. It's all important, because there's nothing worse than reading, in my opinion, when you're reading a book and you know stuff about this, and then you're going, no, that's not right. That's not right. That's not right. Because then you're drawn out of the story. You're no longer thinking about the story. You're thinking about how this person didn't do their research. And so I try really hard. And when you write 16th century, also, you have to worry about, what words you use. So I have open a dictionary constantly that tells me the origin of words, because like they didn't use the word penis until the 17th century or the 1700s. So it's like, not that I talk about that a lot in my, but just as an example. So there's a lot of research from grand things like who survived battles and when were they and where were they, and all the way down to the little things like, can I use the word, whatever, scanning, like when someone scans, can you use that word? And yes, you can, because it was referred to looking back then versus scanning on a computer. But you have to be careful. You have to make sure you're getting all that right. So yes, a lot of research.
Okay. And Timothy, you also kind of mentioned research, although just going to drive-ins. But for your next book too, was there any research you had to do for that?
Yeah, so I mean, the research of going to drive-ins was since Ren has been working at a drive-in movie theater since he was 15. He's becoming manager. I wanted to learn a lot about the drive-in movie culture and the types of people that went there, and so I did get to go in and watch them, do the take-up reels and how they switched them over. There was a lot of stuff that went into that, taking photographs, doing research, but specifically with Never Been Kissed, there is a B plot in that story where Ren befriends an elderly filmmaker who was kind of cast out of Hollywood in the 1980s. And I kind of became a little bit obsessed with female filmmakers from the 1970s. And so I did a lot of research into directors like Claudia Weil and Barbara Loden and Barbara Streisand and Elaine May and all these people. And I went back to watch these movies, and I actually read a lot of books and listened to podcasts on their lives and the sexism and things that they faced during that period in Hollywood's history. And so I think, as you mentioned earlier, some people think of romance as fluff. There is so much work that goes into, I always think about like romance romance is kind of like a cotton candy machine. You don't think about like how many things go into making a cotton candy machine that like actually makes the cotton candy. And so for me, like that was that research. But for my second book, You're a Mean One, Matthew Prince, this was also very difficult research, but Matthew Prince is very rich, spoiled, very whatever. And so, you know, I'm not necessarily a fashionista, but I knew that he was. And so that included me like looking up trends and brands and deciding, you know, what stores he shopped in, finding the geography and the real estate of New York City on the Upper East Side and things like that. And so I think even writing contemporary romance leads you down the pathway of even researching things you really never thought you'd be researching. So, you know, of course, I'm saving $7,000 Saint Laurent jackets to my cart on, you know, Saks Fifth Avenue that I will never afford and never wear, but now are live forever in my computer. So, yeah.
Right. And T, I know you spent some years doing investigations, so some may be kind of like built-in past research for you, but how much research are you having to do for like individual cases for your books?
Right. Well, as my bio implies, it was pretty natural for me to wind up writing romantic suspense. I loved reading romance books, and it was relatively easy for me to combine my law enforcement background with these books. I say relatively because, as Heather can tell you, when you're trying to combine a romance plus a crime, I mean, even in historical Scotland, whether it's military issues or it's contemporary law enforcement issues, you have, let's say, approximately 90,000 plus words in which to write not only a romance, but a crime plot or a military plot that has to be solved. And you have to combine those two into the same amount of pages and word count that a typical thriller is in its entirety, or a typical romance is in its entirety. That's not to say that, you know, great contemporaries are easy to write. I don't mean that. So I've kind of been lucky in that for the most part, the extent of my research kind of extends to doing Google searches. However, Tough Justice was a very, very difficult book for me to write because I don't have any medical training beyond what the agencies I worked for sent me to, you know, first aid, CPR, things like that. So it was really difficult. I had to interview an ER doctor twice, a couple other doctors, an NYFD rescue paramedic. It was really tough to get the details just right, and they really had to be perfect so the procedures in the ER are adequate. Otherwise, someone's going to die. And that was really tough. It was really time consuming. I swore I would never do a book with that much research again. And here I am writing the sequel to that book, Burning Justice, which is an arson investigation. And I have exactly zero arson investigative background. So this is going to be another challenge, but I'll get through it.
We get the arson guy next.
Yes. Yeah.
And Lacie, it sounds like maybe a lot of the conflict in your books is stuff that you have just experienced in real life, which is unfortunate. But I assume you also had to research some things.
Yeah, no, I'm the worst. I research very, very little. I like to write about travel, and I have traveled a lot because of my job and just because I have like a serious case of wanderlust. And I'm just terrible. I'm like, if I did something like for the layover, there's a bioluminescence scene, and I did that in Puerto Rico, and I was like, do they have bioluminescence there? Fantastic. Move that experience over here. And I just rolled with it. And then from the jump, the group of friends goes on a safari. And I had spent quite a bit of time in that area because I did the backpacking trip around there. And like one of my favorite places that I went was St. Lucia. So I wanted to base it there. But then I also wanted to combine some of the other things that I had done into that trip. So I was like, you know what, I'm just going to mush it all together and make up a place called St. Lucia. And I did that. So yeah, I'm not, but I also wouldn't mind my work being called fluff, because I think fluff is delightful and people are welcome to call my books fluff. So it works out.
Okay. Okay, and T, you kind of already told us what you're working on next, but the rest of you, if you are allowed to talk about, I know sometimes contracts you're not allowed to, but what's coming next from you guys?
So what's coming next are two different things. In July 18th of this year, Honor and Duty book number 6 of the Feral Canine series releases. There are going to be 7 books total, and book 7 follows a Department of Homeland Security canine officer. And he's kind of been in love with this woman for years and years. And unfortunately for him, this woman he's been in love with, who is Puerto Rican, so I'm digging the bioluminescence. That's going to make a guest appearance in my book as well. Unfortunately, though, for my hero, the woman he's been in love with happens to be the widow of his brother. So that's kind of like a built-in conflict from the start, one of many. So that's July, that's Honor and Duty. And I'm working on Burning Justice, the sequel to Tough Justice, which won't come out until next year. And that's about ATF Special Agent Brett Tanner and his canine Blaze.
Lacie?
Okay, so I told y'all about From the Jump, so I think I did kind of skip a few steps ahead, but I will say, I think we announced this publicly. I feel like we did. I sold a 3rd book to Penguin Random House, and it is coming out in the spring, and I am moving a little more into kind of the women's fiction genre, and it is about a woman who lives in a small town. It's kind of I kind of feel like the town itself is a character, but it's basically about when the town is thrown into disarray when a local millionaire dies and leaves his fortune to the town. But in order to get it, they have to compete for it in a game, and only the winners will get it. And it's called The Only Game in Town. And I'm super excited about that one too. It's not available for pre-order yet, but it was fun to talk about.
Sounds so fun. Timothy, you've got Matthew Prince coming next, but do you want to tell us a little bit more about it?
Sure, yeah. So your A Mean One, Matthew Prince comes out October 4th of this year. It is my Christmas rom-com. It's a little bit of a play on Schitt's Creek. So Matthew Prince is young, rich, and thoroughly spoiled. He goes through a major PR mishap and gets sent to stay with his grandparents for the holidays, and where they are boarding a local college student who is struggling financially and can't go home for the holidays. And so that's an opposites attract, only one bunk bed romance. And then I'm currently drafting a 3rd book, which is to come in fall of 2023, called New Adult. And that is a play on 13 going on 30, where a 23-year-old goes to bed 23, wakes up 30 with everything he's ever wanted, except for his best friend who he's been in love with forever. So yeah.
And Heather?
So I had mentioned I'm writing the 4th book in the Sons of Sinclair about the Horsemen of Death. But I also just signed a 4-book contract with Entangled for a new series called The Brotherhood of Solway Moss, which Solway Moss was a battle in King Henry VIII's time period, where it was between Scotland and England, which, you know, they were always battling. And a lot of people who were captured by King Henry, he said that someone could take their place. So like if the chief of a clan was captured, he could send his brother to take his place, and then they would ransom them back. So this brotherhood forms of these four guys who are normally on the Isle of Skye. Their clans are at war, or they're always against each other. But they become sort of brothers because they've all been traded, and they very quickly realize that nobody is going to ransom for them. So it's up to them to get themselves out. And then it's about them returning to the Isle of Skye, to their own clans who are still fighting, but they are a brotherhood because of what they've been through.
Oh.
So that's what that series about. And then I have another book that's coming out in a different series. I have way too many going on right now. That's coming out in August as well. So I think I have 5 books releasing this year. So it's a little bit crazy.
Yeah. Okay. Well, usually the last question I ask is if you've had time to read recently, if there's anything you're loving. But Heather, I'm guessing not you.
Well, I read a lot of nonfiction.
Right.
I read a lot about 16th century battles and things like that. So I do read a little Stephen King too, though. I do like some scary stuff. I'm big into like, ghosts and those sorts of things. So.
T?
Well, I'm giving a workshop at a conference in July. The workshop is called Detective for a Day, and it's sort of like a police academy for writers. So writers will come in and immediately they'll be confronted with a crime scene, which is going to be a dead body. And this is going to be an actual homicide that took place somewhere in the United States. And the workshop will be moderated by homicide detectives. And basically, the authors will be solving the crime, asking the questions, conducting the interviews, and figuring out who done it. So I was never a homicide investigator. It's been in my career only on the periphery. So in preparation, I'm reading this book right now called Murder Along the Way, which is written by a county district attorney about some of the more infamous crimes that he prosecuted while he was a DA.
Okay. Lacie?
Look at me remembering to unmute. Okay, so I think I just read How to Fake It in Hollywood, which I loved. And then I just saw that it comes out today. So this is a perfect time to talk about it. So I loved that. And then I've been trying to swing a little darker just because I feel like maybe I want to go dark. I don't know what's going to happen. So yeah, I liked, I've just finished We Were Never Here, and I really enjoyed that. And now I'm doing the Thursday Murder Club, which is not darker like I thought it would be. It's kind of delightful, but it's fun.
And Timothy?
Well, I just finished reading, I'm a big, like Ren in the book, Nora Ephron fan. So I read Delia Ephron's latest memoir called Left on 10th, about her struggle with leukemia and her late in life romance. She gets married again in her 70s. It was really very sweet. And then I'm currently reading Kosako Jackson's new rom-com called A Dash of Salt and Pepper, which comes out on December 6th, which is like a foodie romance.
Loving the foodie romances. All right. Well, thank you all so much for joining us this evening. This has been such a fun chat. I love all your books. Attendees, we do have all of the currently released books in the store right now. We'll have Lacie's out on July 19th. Her next one, we have The Layover. We will have From the Jump out on July 19th. And I know there was a problem with the website with Lacie's previous book not being on there, but it should have been fixed by now. So if you are not local to us, you can order any of the titles through our webpage. On the events page, they're all together, or we've got them physically in the store. So thanks, attendees, for joining us. Thank you, authors, so much for chatting with me this evening.
Thanks for fun.
Everybody have a good night.
Yeah,
Good
thank
night.
you. All right, bye-bye.